I'm Nicola Talent and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts. Show me your glasses. Where did you get these?
I got them in a local optician in Phibsboroughs.
You didn't go to Specsavers?
No, didn't go to Specsavers, no. So I've been compared to, you saw the, obviously I've been compared to Roy Orbison recently.
Yeah.
Big O, who's a fantastic singer.
It's very difficult to pick glasses. Especially in an opticians, because there's so many, there's walls of them.
Well, there's an implication there. I failed to pick the right ones, obviously, isn't there? But even beyond that, what happened to me was,
you look like the guy out of Up.
That's what people have been saying.
Have they?
The old man out of Up.
Yeah.
Which is a good film, but not necessarily a look that you want to go for, is it?
Well, you looked at in a sort of a younger, more quirky way.
Actually, what happened to me was I was in there looking at them, and there was some woman, she'd been wheeled in in her wheelchair by her carer.
Yeah.
And every time I put on, she said, "No, I don't like them. Don't like them." And the carer then was getting involved as well, saying no. So I just said, "I'll just take them." And just.
Well, funny, I went to Specsavers and the woman I was sent off.
Yeah.
I was told how shocking it was that I hadn't had glasses up to that point. But see, I actually had a pair of glasses, and what happened to me was spent a fortune on them.
Yeah.
Didn't go to Specsavers, went to this really fancy optician, bought these designer things, and they fell off my head and I drove over them in the car. I mean, and I got so annoyed with myself that I just went, right, I don't need them.
Yeah.
Anyway, eventually had to go, and there's just like 3 walls of the shop are just glasses, and then another little stand in the middle, forward and back glasses.
Yeah.
Which ones do you want? And it's like, I haven't a clue.
No.
So I just let the woman choose.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And nobody's slagged me quite as much as you.
No. People, well, I think somebody said to me, "You look like a brain box." So
who said that to your mother?
one of the kids mentioned it. Okay. You look like a brain box. Yeah, so I'm going to go for that.
Probably isn't a kind of word maybe adults use, is it?
No, probably not.
So anyway.
Speaking of brain boxes.
Yeah. Nellie Walsh.
Nellie Walsh.
Do you know what I'm going to say before we start this? Like, this feud started around 2012 between Nellie Walsh and Peadar Keating.
Yeah.
These are adult men.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's bullets involved in this.
Yeah.
There's people killed. And like all these gangland feuds, can they just never park them? It's an ego thing, is it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Nellie Walsh is particularly, obviously, a volatile sort of character. But if you remember back in the day, when he first started making the Sunday World as this feud began, he always engaged with us on social media. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, he would always, if we put up, I remember the front page we put up about him surviving a hit attempt, and he commented on it. The rats didn't get me, and all of that.
Yeah. So
he's still doing that. 10 years on,
and this has caused his latest issue, which isn't, of course, there was a family. People. Look, it was only last week or the week before, and I remember it was on RTE News.
Yeah.
There was a story about a house in Clondalkin that had gone on fire during the night, and there was a woman in her 50s upstairs. 2 Gardaí had got up on a ladder basically and saved her. The rest of the people in the house had got out, but this was a sure thing that she would have been killed had they not bravely and kind of outside their job. Description really, to be going into a burning building. But nonetheless, they were thanked and honoured by the police and their local Clondalkin or Ronestown, was it?
I'm not sure.
Either or.
Yeah.
So that happened. And then, of course, the thing at the end of the news was that the Gardaí didn't suspect that the fire had started by accident. So you kind of read between the lines and know this has got something to do, probably with intimidation or something. But in the end of the day, this is an innocent family. And they've been targeted in an effort to get at Nellie Walsh by, presumably and suspectedly, Peadar Keating, who's behind bars.
So, yeah, of course. So he's behind bars. He obviously has not thrown any launch any arson attack personally, but that obviously is the suspicion. I mean, this is a long-running issue. Last year, Nellie Walsh survived 2 very serious assassination attempts, one in in Tala in October, and a second one in December in Carlow. On the first occasion, a machine gun was fired at him. He narrowly escaped. He escaped with only really minor injuries. And in December, just before Christmas, on the run up to Christmas, he'd arranged to buy a car. When he got there, a couple of guys jumped out with a handgun and shot at him 6 times. So this has been a concerted effort to kill him. I mean, they're only the most recent. He obviously had spent a long period in prison when things had died down. Nellie Walsh had served a lengthy sentence. I think it was something like 7 years behind bars in total for trying to kill a guy called Michael Fraser. Michael Fraser would have been a known criminal figure, would have been an associate of Fat Freddie Thompson, and it was believed that Nellie Walsh was hired as a sort of gun for hire rather than anything personal. So that was the,
come back to the origins of this before we come on to the idea that Peadar Keating is suspected of having arranged an arson attack from behind bars in prison. But come back to the origins. It began in 2012 when his own gang accused him of trying to muscle in on the drugs trade in West Dublin. So he was basically trying to take a slice of the action.
Yeah, they were kind of young guns, I suppose.
Yeah.
They would have had connections maybe with associates of John Gilligan, people like that, kind of off centre. But there was obviously a very established Kinahan cartel network run by Peadar Keating, but also, they really controlled that part of West Dublin, more for the Bomber Kavanagh, sort of the Bomber Kavanagh franchise.
And like Peadar Keating back in 2012 we wouldn't have been that well known with him, but of course, well, no, we wouldn't have known him that well, if you know what I mean. He was a character that was sort of in the ether, but back in 2012, of course, the Kinahans are in Spain. They have just about opened, Daniel Kinahan has just about opened his boxing gym in Spain. They have very much migrated there to the Costa del Sol, but they are 2 years after Operation Shovel, which was an effort by Europol to take them down. And there's figures floating around that they are at this point back in business, have beaten Shovel and are basically in control of up to 90% of the drug trade in Ireland. They had become extremely powerful. They'd made wholesale connections down in Limerick and elsewhere. And in Clondalkin, which is valuable drugs turf, you have Peadar Keating. And Peadar Keating is one of probably Bomber Kavanagh's number one man here in Ireland. Now, Bomber Kavanagh was at this point in 2012 based in Birmingham. He was establishing himself as the Kinahans' number one man in the UK.
Yep.
That franchise. And in Dublin, he had the Byrne brothers, David and Liam, and Peadar Keating was his kind of, basically his lieutenant.
Yeah, basically. And they probably had their own, Peadar Keating and Liam Byrne probably had their own kind of clients, for want of a better term. But Peadar Keating and that network had a very established sort of drugs business, not just the distribution and the sale of them, but also a number of businesses laundering money, a number of seemingly legitimate businesses laundering them. They would have been maybe a decade older than Nellie Walsh, but Nellie Walsh obviously was one of these kind of guys that become famous in gangland as a really young man. And they spring up all the time, these kind of reckless...
Head the balls.
Yeah.
And somebody who's ambitious and probably isn't going to take orders and isn't going to follow the order.
Yeah. And exactly. Not bow down to the order. And he was also like one of these prolific social media guys who wanted to, make a bit of a name for himself, and was, unlike Peadar Keating, who seemed to go to extreme lengths all through his criminal career until he was more or less starting to get arrested for the Mago Gately hit.
Mm-hmm.
A deliberate effort by Peadar Keating to always stay under the radar. Nellie Walsh was putting up pictures of himself with guns and balaclavas and making threats, commenting on stories about himself, seemed to enjoy the limelight. If you send him an email on Facebook, he'd get back to you. Not the kind of guy who's probably got that longevity.
Well, having said that, we're now
still
in
here.
2023 and he's still here despite all these attempts on his life.
And as he says on TikTok...
And this is the most recent kind of social media posting by Nellie Walsh, which is probably...
Yeah, so he's on
what kick-started maybe this possible arson attack.
Yeah, well, I think it probably did. There's obviously been two attempted hits on his life. We know then last year. Subsequently, then he seems to have moved around the country, spent some time down south in the southern part of Ireland. But obviously, it was sparked recently, and he's on TikTok saying 30 bullets still alive, took 6 bullets, and I'm still here. Are yous ready? And we're coming for yous, rats. Then in another one.
So, and he's referring to Keating and the
referring to
Kinahan
Keating.
organisation as being rats. And of course, that floats around in the gangland ether a lot. Accusations are constantly being levelled at the top of the Kinahan organisation. Certainly a narrative has been put out by members of, I suppose, the Hutch organised crime group who are at war with the Kinahans, that why are the Kinahans still free? Is it because they're touting and they've given up everybody else? Now, there's no concrete evidence of any of that, but that does float around. And I think that sort of accusation of ratting in the underworld is thrown out quite willy-nilly. I mean, if somebody basically gets away with something, despite the fact that there are coincidences and sometimes people aren't caught with their hands on drugs, or maybe the laws don't allow the state prosecute them for something, they will be branded a rat, and the punishment for a rat is death.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the feud between Keating and Nellie Walsh is very bitter. People's families have been involved. Obviously, Nellie Walsh is a very close friend of his. He was killed, Dean Johnson. It's been said, and
when was Dean Johnson killed?
Was it 2012? I'll just double check that. But so he was killed. He'd been out with Nellie Walsh in a pub. He wasn't involved in crime. Dean Johnson, a sort of relatively ordinary Joe. I think they'd swapped jackets at some point during the night. Somebody had jumped out of a car and shot at him, thinking he was Nellie Walsh, and he had died. So it goes back that far,
And it was 2014 when Michael Fraser was shot in a church car park.
Yeah.
And he managed to drive himself to a Garda station where he got help.
Yeah.
And it was for that attempted murder, that Walsh was jailed.
Yeah.
In prison, he's been attacked a number of times by members of the Kinahan cartel. Presuming now, if he's out of jail at the moment, but has to be separated completely from them.
Yeah.
Is he at war now with the Kinahan cartel, or is it just a personal gripe?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I presume he's... look, I mean, you can see the resources that the Kinahan cartel have still. People might be locked up. They still have, which Peadar Keating has been through all these incidents. We're linking them to him. He's never been arrested or charged, obviously. But whether Nellie Walsh has those sort of resources or backup, anything he does, he probably has to do himself. So there are resources there still, particularly kind of on the ground for these types of things.
Keating, of course, has a kind of a checkered track record when it comes to assassination attempts.
Yeah.
He's understood to be the guy that would have directed, shall we say, Glenn Clark, who was a young man from Dublin, who, before he died himself with a gunshot wound to the head, believed to be self-inflicted or accidentally inflicted, he had been linked to the murder of the
Trevor O'Neill
in Mallorca. It's understood he was flown out to Mallorca after Jonathan Hutch was seen there on holidays, and he was flown out to Mallorca to carry out a hit on Jonathan Hutch. Jonathan Hutch got away and Trevor O'Neill was shot dead in front of his family. But previous to that, Clark was also suspected of being the gunman down here at the IFSC.
Yeah.
He went down to target a member of the Hutch organisation, and he ended up killing a homeless man called Martin O'Rourke, a completely innocent man who was actually on the road to recovery himself and expecting a new baby. So Keating was the associate, really, of Clark, who is suspected of having brought him in for those paid hits.
Yeah, I think Keating was, especially as the feud went on, Keating became the man Bomber Kavanagh trusted most, and the man he expected to fix the things that needed to be fixed in Ireland. And Glenn Clark was probably the gunman of choice for the the Byrne organised crime group during that phase of the feud, and Peadar Keating was suspected of being a fixer for all of these things, the movement of guns, getting cars, getting information, and we saw that obviously with the Mago Gately, where we saw he was involved in procuring trackers, putting them on cars. So that's kind of the role he had in that.
Sinister role, really, in the background of a kind of
Yeah.
And we'll talk in a minute about how he kind of became more hands-on and how he was ultimately caught in an attempt to kill Mago Gately. But just going back to Glenn Clark, because, Glenn Clark basically was linked by DNA to the gun that was used in the Martin O'Rourke murder, which was dumped in a bin, and he made his getaway that time on a bicycle. That was at the very early beginnings of the feud in 2016. And again, in Mallorca, he was caught on CCTV and he was captured coming through the airport, etc. The gun was never found that was used in relation to Trevor O'Neill, but it was believed it was sourced on the island by the Kavanagh organisation. So Keating sort of was his boss here, I suppose, in Ireland, and probably part of the structure that would ultimately lead to his paymaster for these murders. But Clark, sometime later, was found dead in a car with a gun, and there is a gunshot wound to him, and it was suspected that this was a kind of an accident.
Yeah, I mean, there was a few theories, wasn't there, initially?
Well, the investigation was completed.
Yeah.
And it was put down to an accidental death. His body was released to the family and he was cremated. And the car, I don't know what happened to it, but it was after sort of that investigation into his death was closed, that he was linked to the other two murders, and it was realised that this is actually a hitman.
Yeah.
And then the other theories started coming forward that, was he shot because of these two botched hits? Yeah. There was no way of going back to investigate that. It was something that was sort of, I think, one of those situations that the Gardaí quickly moved on from it.
Yeah.
There was actually no salvaging the situation because the investigation had been so quickly shuttered.
Yeah.
So that was his end. But Keating then, I suppose, after those botched hits and other ones, and a lack of success that was seen from the Kinahan Kavanagh organisation, bit of frustration from the bosses, Bomber Kavanagh and Daniel Kinahan, they decided that Mago Gately was the one they really wanted to. He was their target number one. And they, as we have spoken about before on this podcast, brought Imre Arakas into the country. And Kavanagh and Daniel Kinahan decided they didn't want to leave anything to risk this time. They were definitely going to finish him off. They needed a big head on a plate. And they used their own inner circle, people who wouldn't usually be as hands-on in these murders. Keating, I think, drove the car north that was to be used, put the trackers on it, and him and others, including Douglas Glynn, then Kinahan's main man in Dublin, were all lifted and jailed in relation to this plot to kill. They didn't realise that Imre Arakas was already under surveillance because of another murder he was suspected of in Lithuania.
Yeah.
And that Europe had come together and had sort of warned one another that if he was coming into your territories, he was up to something. And of course, they'd noticed that he'd flown to Ireland on a number of occasions, tipped off the Gardaí when he was on his way in this time, and they set up a surveillance operation and they caught them all red-handed, basically.
Yeah.
Phones, messages, the lot.
Yeah, exactly. And Keating then obviously pled guilty when it came before the Special Criminal Court. He's currently locked up in Portlaoise Prison. In Portlaoise Prison, he has become one of the guys controlling what goes on in there.
Yeah.
Very much his seniority has carried through into Portlaoise. He's directing one of the landings there, calling the shots among the criminals of all types. So that's obviously where the suspicion arises that he has been able to reach from in behind bars to still direct this campaign against Nellie Walsh. Obviously, the issue with Nellie Walsh is very, very personal. It's not just an issue.
What is that? Is it a pride thing now?
Well, I think it's to do with Peadar Keating's partner. Is her brother was killed, a guy called Jay Carroll. Jay Carroll didn't have a lot of criminal convictions. I think the family maintain he was not involved in criminality. However, there are other sources who have said that he was involved in maybe laundering money for the Kinahan network. He was
He
shot
was
dead.
close enough to Daniel Kinahan.
He was close enough to Daniel Kinahan. He was obviously Peadar Keating's brother-in-law, and he was shot dead as this feud developed with Nellie Walsh.
Because I think that was around 2013.
That was 13,
from memory,
I think, yeah.
because I remember doing up a timeline for something I was doing, and Daniel Kinahan, like Jay Carroll, was supposed to be one of Daniel Kinahan's besties, like,
Yeah.
and he was shot dead.
Yeah.
And the following day, Daniel Kinahan got into the ring at a white collar boxing event in Marbella.
Yeah.
And carried on regardless.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly didn't cancel anything in respect of the friend's death or anything like that.
No, and I mean, obviously the Nellie Walsh faction was blamed at least by Peadar Keating for this murder. So that's a decade ago, but it's that shows you the level of hatred that's going on.
There's a 200,000 bounty on the head of Nellie Walsh, they say.
Yeah.
So Peadar Keating's in jail. We at least know where he is.
Yeah.
There's obviously a problem if he's getting orders or communication to his network outside and is able to order things like this. And he clearly has access still to cash, and his network are still clearly making drug money. Nellie Walsh is a different case because with a 200,000 bounty on his head, he's the most under threat criminal in the country. And he is very volatile, and he could show up anywhere and do anything. And he's moving about a bit. He was recently back in his native Ronanstown.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely spent a good bit of time down in the southern part of the country. Well, he was in Carlow, and he was also believed to be in the southeast as well for a period of time. He definitely was. So he.
Do you know anything about his finances?
Well, I can't imagine they're that good. The time he was almost shot, he was meeting somebody who had absolutely nothing to do with anything to buy a car, and he was buying a used car for €1,000. So look, he's just not on the same level. However, he's a volatile character. He's able to do what he can do. It's not organized crime as we know it. Getting on TikTok and threatening your rivals is not what would you call it, criminal mastermind stuff. But he is certainly somebody to be feared.
It's that really dangerous stuff, isn't it? It's and that kind of Drogheda feud style, mocking and taunting and almost, come on, come and get me sort of stuff. And that is the really difficult stuff to police.
Yeah, and you get these kind of volatile characters, maybe somebody like Robbie Lawler or somebody like that who, they strike a bit of fear in gangland as well, because people know that they're capable of doing something, even if they're likely to get caught or not get away with it. And I think that causes a bit of fear, because how can you stop it? I mean, the investigation into Peadar Keating's network continues. There's been cab raids in recent months. Targeting is his network.
And his network is still based in the same area, the Clondalkin. So they're both all on top of one another, same as...
They're all on top of one another. So watch TikTok to see what happens next. Yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, it's crazy as it might seem, but that's where this is. And that's where it's been for 10 years. I mean, it's 10 years since we put up a story about Nellie Walsh, and he started commenting. And then I do
30 bullets is a lot to survive, isn't it?
30 bullets is a lot. It is a lot. I mean, he is an incredible survivor.
Yeah.
But he's kind of a gangland loner, I think, to an extent.
Yeah, so the glasses work.
The glasses work, yeah, they do work, yeah. Yeah, do they work as a...
Have you found that you're more intelligent when you had them on?
Well, look, it's hard to get more intelligent than I am already, but quite possibly am.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, not to make light of this Nellie Walsh situation is incredibly volatile.
Yeah, and I mean,
when you have innocent people getting targeted, that fire in that home could have ended up in the death of a 50-year-old woman.
Absolutely.
Nothing to do with crime.
there was other people in the house, younger
Yeah.
people who could have also, and
There was a toy in the front garden, actually.
yeah, so
Noticed.
it's scary, and
And the
it's
neighbours, like, I mean, the other houses could have gone on fire,
yeah,
and that investigation continues, obviously,
that
where what
investigation.
accelerants were used and etc. etc. So yeah, it's not to make light of it. It is an extremely dangerous and volatile situation. Portlaoise Prison, like, I suppose we've no exact evidence that that Peadar Keating is picking up the phone and ordering people what to do, but at the same time, it remains a worry that these guys locked up can be as dangerous.
Yeah, and if also, I mean, there are going to be a good lot of them coming out in the near enough future. I
Mm.
mean, a lot of the Kinahan network pled guilty in the special criminal court to
For 5, 6, 7 years.
6, 7, 8 years for these
Yeah.
kind of charges under anti-gangland laws, where they're not uh, pleading guilty to murder, but they're pleading guilty to
Mm.
participation in an attempted murder. So they've a lot of them have got sort of similar sentences. Some of them will come to an end in the next year or two. They'll be out and about again.
But undoubtedly, like, their financial power and their cell structures have been dismantled, because often, even if you saw it with the terrorist organizations, if you were able to disrupt them and even jail them for 2 and 4 years, that was enough to dismantle the cell units that they were, because it's in the cell units that they're particularly dangerous.
and also the fact that they had this constant supply of drugs and
Yeah.
firearms. I mean, there was no limits, and it was efficient and smooth. Like, without the money from that, these guys won't have any power at all.
Mm.
So they need the people above them as well to give them authority and allow them to make the money that can spread these things.
So, as regards feuds, I may be hitting you with this now, but you've got this one going on in Clondalkin. Obviously, Finglas remains terribly volatile with the flashy mob. Um,
There are, I suppose, another couple of small incidents in Drogheda, continues on. The situation in Limerick seems a lot quieter.
a lot quieter, yeah.
But you see these kind of random acts of violence, even if you see in Galway this weekend, a totally other scale maybe than the Hutchkinson feud. But there's these that's some of these things are linked to ongoing things that have gone on for years, and I suppose this one shows you that these things don't tend to go away.
No, and you see, there's probably stuff bubbling away under the
There
surface
is,
that you wouldn't be aware of at the moment that could result in what will end up being the next big feud.
yeah,
Because when you look back at this was basically a personality,
yeah,
like being Nellie Walsh, not willing to toe the line, out there doing his own thing, and then, wanting to go it alone, which is
yeah,
exactly what happened in Drogheda.
yeah,
And pretty much, if you peel back the layers, it's probably ultimately what happened in the Kinahan organisation.
yeah,
That sometimes when the leadership becomes all powerful and dictating,
yeah.
you will have these. You probably don't have sort of law-abiding people that go and get themselves involved in
No,
the drug dealing industry in the
no,
first place. So you probably have a lot of people with volatile characteristics anyway who don't like authority.
no.
And I think when organizations get very powerful, you will always have that pullback. And
Yeah, people get jealous and greedy and want more for themselves, absolutely. But it just shows you how long these things can go on.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, Nicola.